When I was around 11 or 12, I started to feel very prone to depression and dark intrusive thoughts. Around that time, I also developed this skill for very vivid daydreaming. I obviously thought they were unrelated at the time. Over the past year only, I've been diagnosed with OCD, and I've finally started to put together how that maladaptive daydreaming I've been doing my whole life was actually part of a compulsion. And now I've been able to understand myself finally, and put things together. So it's kind of like Steve Jobs says, where you can only connect the dots looking backwards. I'm finally in this place where I'm able to connect the dots of my life. I wanted to talk about this on my channel, one, because I've lived with the shame and secrecy and embarrassment for so long, and I think this will be cathartic for me. And as well, I hope that if people recognise themselves in my story, then maybe I can cut out the amount of years that they're going to spend alone and confused, and that would make me feel really good if I could do that. So starting at the beginning, when I was about 11 or 12, I started to do this activity in my room, where I would like pace really fast, and I would like jump off walls. When I look back on it, I don't know how it would have looked from the outside, but I was pacing, I was gesturing, I was like whispering to myself. I was like doing all these things in order to create daydreams in my head, or they helped me to facilitate. I felt like my body felt like it needed to move in that way, and I was kind of part acting things out, but not really. I would stand in the middle of my room and kind of whisper to myself, and I don't know, it was a really strange thing, but it was like a thing I enjoyed doing when I was young. So all the time when I had my own time, I would go into my room and I would basically do this over and over again. I would repeat the same scenes over and over again every day. When I was at school, I kind of played the scenes in my head, but because I couldn't do anything physically, I felt almost like a discomfort in my body. I, could feel myself getting anxious, and my head would kind of feel blurry, and I just felt like I was a very anxious person, and leaping forward, OCD is an anxiety disorder, so it sort of again explains a lot of how I was feeling at the time. I used to like sit in my class and repeat the same names over and over again, and I was scared when I'd get called on by the teacher that words were going to come out my mouth. So those were the main ways this manifested itself when I was young. And I continued to do that activity in my room over and over for years and years. Obviously, I think when you're 11 or 12, that can kind of be accepted by yourself as like playing, even though I don't know what I thought about it at the time, if I'm being honest. It was just an activity I felt I needed to do and that I felt I enjoyed. Around, I guess when I was older, like 15, 16, it started to feel quite embarrassing, like more like I was keeping a secret of doing something that was childish. Around that time I kind of started to go out and I was drinking with my friends. I was kind of acting as a teenager, as an adult, and then I was coming back to my room and I was like playing out scenarios and playing out scenes and talking to myself. I started to obviously feel like this disconnect and this feeling that I was doing something very childish and very stupid, really. I felt really stupid. But what I realised around that time is that I couldn't stop it. So when I tried to stop or tried to do something else, I couldn't. If I was in my room, that was all I wanted to do. If I was alone, that was all I wanted to do. If my mind was idle, it would turn to scenarios on loop. That was really the way I lived when I was younger. And then I had in my mind, oh, it's okay, I'm going to go to university when I'm 17, I'm moving out, I'm going to be a grown-up. So I had all these big expectations in my mind of finally breaking this habit, going to university, like being an adult, being really cool. And what happened was I went to university and I'm in my wee dorm room, and I immediately, again, I feel that physical urge to do what I've been doing, but because I was so desperate to be a grown-up, and also I kind of had this strange fear of hidden cameras. I just did a fear of being caught doing what I was doing, and just how insane it would look. So I forced myself to stop doing that. Now, as I forced myself to stop doing that, I became completely depressed, and there was a voice in my head telling me I didn't want to live. It was going on and on and on. Now, at the time, I obviously saw no connection between these two things. I didn't see a connection between my stopping myself from my compulsion and becoming suicidal, really. Anyway, I ended up having a breakdown, and I did sort of try to listen to those voices in my head. I went to hospital, I saw a psychiatrist, but I would never, this was a different time as well, I mean, I would just never ever have thought to tell him what I was doing in my head, or that it would have anything to do with the daydreaming and this stupid childish activity I was doing. I would never have connected those two things. So I kind of spoke to him in a very superficial way, like, I'm starting uni, I'm homesick, blah blah blah, and he took me in that way, and we never explored anything further than that. So I saw a psychiatrist at that point, maybe a couple of sessions, but I was giving him nothing and he was giving me nothing, and I didn't learn anything about myself from that point. Again, I thought like a person prone to depression. I thought I had depression, and that was all, really. And I never understood what my daydreams and what that activity and physical activity was doing for me. Now looking back, I can see like that activity is the compulsion that was kind of saving me from my darker thoughts. So my life, like, through my 20s was really, I had very low self-esteem. And I think OCD will do this for you. You feel ashamed and you feel disconnected. You feel, if you're spending all your time in your head in daydreams, and a lot of times I'm daydreaming in someone else's body, really, and you know, another character's persona. So you feel like this massive split within yourself. The good thing was that I always thought I was going to grow up and save myself by the next thing I was doing. So I was desperate to like go traveling, and then I would be a traveler, be a different type of person. And what happened was I traveled, I daydreamed, I barely made friends or anything. I would just basically daydream in my hotel room. So the thing is, you know, looking back on my life, it's like I've had experiences because I always pushed myself out there, but I always pushed myself out there and then retreated in my head. But I do think, I think during my 20s, I didn't look into it too much because it was this soothing thing for me. I was having so many anxious experiences, I was pushing myself out there so much that the daydreaming was kind of doing its job, which was making me feel good and, you know, easing my mind after some social difficulties. Anytime I tried to push myself out there, and particularly I had a lot of social anxiety around dating and anything like this, and I wanted to be normal and to have a boyfriend, but that never happened for me because the minute I would date, I would become like overwhelmed with my daydreams in that world. You know, I can only describe it as like you feel like you're going under and you're not going to come out. That's really how I felt. So, and it's funny because I always thought like there was some kind of coincidence going on, that every time I would try to date, I would end up in a more intense daydream situation. I was like, well, this is such a like bad timing, this is such a coincidence, this keeps happening, now I can't date. I obviously didn't see like the link with anxiety and really like why that was happening. So that was my life through my 20s. I think the daydreaming did kind of serve a purpose, and you know, it was this kind of yo-yo in between pushing myself into awkward situations, daydreaming to cover up the problem, and just like this loop that was going on. When I got into my 30s, I started to become very conscious and more aware of the shame around the daydreaming and like the content of that. I won't get into that, but it was around that time what had been keeping me safe was starting to kind of crumble, because the shame of the daydreams was becoming so much that it wasn't serving its purpose anymore. So I think I was around, the more ashamed I got of the daydreaming, the more my dark thoughts and depression and this sense of not wanting to be alive was coming to the forefront. And again, at this time, I had no idea of the link between these. I just knew I was trying to stop my daydreaming because it was shameful, and because I just felt like I couldn't be a normal person with it. But around my 30s, it's just like everything became so difficult for me, and the daydreaming became so shameful that nothing was really serving its purpose or doing what it was intended to be doing. My life had become so difficult because around my 30s, I was feeling so much social isolation and so much shame around not having a partner, a relationship, children. I really thought like having children or having a relationship was going to save me and like save me from my mental health problems. So I was so upset. It was kind of like a catch-22, which is like I appeared to be someone who wanted to have these things, but I couldn't make those things happen. Like I could not really move from a first date to a relationship situation because I just did not understand. It was like something was missing in me. Like I wanted to retreat back into myself as opposed to build any kind of intimacy or relationship with someone. But I couldn't, and it was so difficult, even just having friends, like talking about it. Every time you go out with your girlfriends, it's like, oh, are you dating? Have you got a boyfriend? Blah, blah, blah. And you've got to make up excuses, and you've got to try and, I made up so many stories of why I was by myself, and sometimes like those stories would work for me and other times they wouldn't, and it was so exhausting, and I felt so much shame, and I felt like so many people were shaming me and laughing at me. Like that's really how I felt. So in my mid-30s was when, things just really were super difficult for me. I felt so overwhelmed and ashamed of my exterior life, and I felt so overwhelmed and ashamed of my internal life. And I think when those two things happened and broke down, like that's when I was like, I need to get therapy. And I had this sense that what I was doing in my head was a big part of the problem, but I still couldn't explain it. I still didn't feel like I had the language for it. So when I went to therapy, I really was just going on more of a surface level of being depressed, not wanting to live, feeling like life was too hard because people were judging me, feeling like I had no one. I was just completely isolated. I was isolated in terms of my thoughts and my whole internal life and my problems. Like I am lucky to have really good family and friends, but I don't speak about this stuff, obviously, because I just didn't have the vocabulary for it, and I was embarrassed by it all, really. So and the good thing is it's an anxiety disorder, so when I'm at my most relaxed and when I'm with the people that I love, it's calm, it's not happening. I can just enjoy that time. It's really like when I'm by myself or when I'm in moments of anxiety and when I'm in, social situations that are uncomfortable for me, or just, when I was bored. I mean, it was really what my brain was doing when it was idle all the time. So I got therapy. I literally was a wreck. I mean, I was just like crying, proper crying, and I think looking back on that, I think the therapist must have been a bit confused, because I think, what I was saying, like, oh, I don't have a partner, I don't have family, didn't quite, I wouldn't say it quite reflected just how depressed and devastated I was and how troubled I was. I don't think those two things really lined up that much, because now, at points where I'm feeling good and yet I still don't have, the partner and the family, but I can just think about that in a more logical way. I don't need to break down about it. But I was in a complete state, because everything was crumbling. Anyway, you know, that therapy didn't really help. I think it helped me at that point just to have somebody to talk to and to have a bit of an outlet for what I was going through, even though like I never got to the root of the problem there. So I had that therapy kind of around my mid-30s, and then, you know, later on COVID happened. And when COVID happened and I lived by myself and I felt very isolated, my maladaptive daydreaming became really intense and seemed to, I think at that point, that became the focus of my problem, because I wasn't going out and doing anything. I wasn't in anxious situations. I wasn't, you know, it wasn't serving this purpose of soothing me. It was just, it was constant for when nothing was going on. So it's almost like that, at that point, like that became my life, my internal life, without any sense of it serving a purpose of soothing me after an anxious episode or soothing me when I was uncomfortable. It was literally, to be honest, you know, I felt like the way I would describe it is like you have like a kind of second life floating above your own subconscious in your own life, and it grows, it gets brighter and dimmer, like depending on how you're feeling, I suppose. Like at night it gets really strong for me, and then, you know, if I see family or whatever, it dims. But I honestly felt around that time, you know, I was just carrying stories around my head and I wasn't existing. I felt very much out of my body. And, you know, when you feel a disconnect to your body and all you're doing is carrying stories around, it really does, it causes like extreme physical discomfort, really. So that's how I felt around that time of COVID. And around that time is, I think, when I really started to investigate like what is the problem here, because this is my main problem now. So what's going on? I started to Google like addicted to daydreaming and can't stop daydreaming, all this kind of stuff. And that's when I found the phrase maladaptive daydreaming. So this is maybe 2020. So just 5 years ago now, and what I found was that phrase was only coined in 2002. So even when I had started doing this, there was no phrase for it, really. There was no name for it. But basically when I think I watched a YouTube video on it, and when I was reading the comments, I was like, oh my god, I was like, this is exactly what I've been doing, and these people are describing exactly what my problem was. And I started crying, because, you know, it's something really intense when you realise you're not alone, and what you're doing, other people are doing. Like, I thought I was doing something that was so unique and so just me. Like, it was just me, and I was stupid and I was childish. That's what I really felt about myself. So like seeing this, to be honest, it was quite hard to look at. Like I read the comments and then I cried, and then I was like, I don't want to look that up again. Like, I just don't want to even face that. But it was also helpful just having a name and being like, yeah, that is what I've been doing. I think like the term, I mean, even the term daydreaming obviously conjures up like really positive connotations, and everybody daydreams, so it's kind of like this is why it's been so hard. You know, I just couldn't have even thought about trying to describe it to somebody, because it's just kind of like, oh well, daydreaming, like no big deal. But it's basically you just can't stop it, and it overtakes you, and you would literally rather like spend the day in bed just daydreaming as to getting on with anything in your life. Like when it's at its worst, you literally just don't want to get out of your head. Like, I honestly feel like I just couldn't climb out of my head. That's how it felt. Like I would need to like climb out, and it was so difficult. Like getting my body to move was so difficult. But you know, I've never spoken about this. At that point, I'd never spoken about this to anyone, and you know, it was just this really difficult thing that I was going through myself. Anyway, I think like once I had the name Maladaptive Daydreaming, that's I think when I started to search to see if I could get help or therapy specifically for that. And interestingly enough, I thought if it's got a name for it, probably it'll come up in a lot of therapists' list of things that they deal with, but I think I found it under one therapist. So I found one therapist who actually specified that they dealt with maladaptive daydreaming. I emailed that therapist, I explained, I've been doing this my whole life and I've not ever spoken about it, and I really need help now. And she was like, oh, I'm fully booked, so good luck. It was just like the one person I thought, I'd feeling so happy, like, oh my goodness, like I don't need to try and explain to this person what it is, like they know what it is, so they can get on trying to help me. And like one person was busy, so I was really devastated by that. And then, so I think I would have left that for a while, and then I decided to try it again with the therapy. I found a therapist where I just explained what my problem was, and she said that she was aware of that, and that she would help me kind of recognise my triggers and all this kind of thing. That's what she said to me. So when I got that therapy, I was in such a bad place. I was just so devastated with it and so fed up with it, and I really just wanted to be normal, to have like a clear mind, or to think normal thoughts. That therapist, she was really nice, but she was kind of saying things. It probably was a bit detrimental to me looking back now, because she was like, oh, isn't it amazing what your brain's doing, that's great, and just saying, it's a coping mechanism and all this kind of stuff, I think, which is kind of true, but I don't know, she really took it in a very light-hearted way, and I don't think she understood like the magnitude of the problem. So I feel like there was a bit of disconnect there, but again, it was just nice to get therapy, just to actually like get the words out and get things outside of my head, because I had nobody to talk to. So that was that. After I'd had that and that didn't help, I just felt so frustrated, because it was like I could speak to her once a week, but so what, like the rest of the time I was just doing the same things, and she was just telling me, oh, live in the present. I think, she was giving me mindfulness tips that you would give like a person with a normal mind, I think, and they just didn't work for me. It really is, and again, it made me feel stupid, because it was like, why can't I stop this? Like, why can't I control it? This is so dumb. Like, the daydreaming became so shameful that what was happening was I was doing the daydream, then I was beating myself up, and then I wanted to die, and then I was stopping the daydreaming, and then, I wanted to die again, and it was just like this non-stop torture in my mind. And, the daydreaming by itself is not torturous, but the fact that it goes on and on and on, and it won't stop, and you can't stop it, and you need to do it at night, and it's once you get consciousness in the morning, it comes back to you. So it really was just stressing me out. I think around this time, I was reading, because I was getting the therapy, I was reading more about the maladaptive daydreaming, and I think people started to, I might have noticed that people were talking about OCD, and I was like, what's this got to do with OCD? Because that's to do with like being clean. Like, I just had the same stereotypical thoughts that everybody has about what OCD is, in terms of like keeping clean and being neat, and washing your hands and turning off light switches. So I was like, right, what's this got to do with OCD? I just thought people were saying like it was a coincidence that they had OCD and they did this as well. And then when I started to look into OCD and look into some of the symptoms associated with that, or like the patterns associated with that, and even some of like the darker thoughts that I was having that I would never have said, they could be explained by OCD. So in my mind, I started to think, oh, maybe that's what this is. So it was last year, in my mind I had this feeling that that's what it could have been, but again, I didn't really believe that. and I was too overwhelmed to even try and help myself at this point, really. And I was going to be moving house. I was going to be moving to a place where I thought, you know, I can have more of a life. I think I'd got myself quite isolated during COVID, so I moved into the city. And again, even though I've never learned my lesson from about a million different, you know, job changes and all these kind of things that I always thought were going to save me, travelling, just all the changes that I made in my life. Again, I fooled myself into thinking, I was like, oh, when I move into the city, that's it, like I'm not going to daydream, I'm not going to have these thoughts in my new place, like I'm drawing the line and I'm going to control this. Again, I was telling myself this. And then when I moved in here, I think I was so determined to stop that again I became more depressed, and you know, I still didn't understand the link between these, but you know, I was so depressed, and when I was trying to stop the daydreaming I got more and more depressed, and to be honest the content of my daydreaming became quite difficult to deal with. So it was almost like I couldn't find a happy place anymore, like the content of my daydreaming had become quite difficult itself, and I was depressed because I hadn't been able to stop it. And I just, to be honest, at that time, I was maybe a couple of weeks into living here, and I just felt like, really like I was having a breakdown. I felt like I have been fighting a losing battle for 30 years or 25 years, you know, whenever like I kind of started to become conscious of the problem. I really feel, you know, I can't do anything anymore and I need proper help. So around that time I thought I actually need to see a psychiatrist and I need to know what is wrong, like what is wrong with my brain. I spoke to a mental health specialist, told her everything. I got referred to a GP, told her everything. And then got referred to a psychiatrist. So I saw the psychiatrist, I told him absolutely everything. I went through, you know, everything that happened, all my thoughts, everything I was doing in my mind, like everything that was embarrassing. I told him like the worst thoughts. I told him everything. And he basically was like, yes, you've got OCD and you need to be treated for that. And to be honest, finding out I had OCD and having kind of been suspecting that over the past year or so, it really has been like the missing piece of a puzzle, because I knew I was prone to depression and suicidal thoughts and really difficult thoughts, and I also knew I was overwhelmed and obsessed with daydreaming and escapism and replaying scenarios over and over and over in my mind. And like this has just been like the missing link to actually understand what is going on in my brain and like why when I try to stop the daydreaming I become depressed, and when I'm depressed I crave escapism and being in my scenarios. So it really did, I did have this, you know, strong feeling like, God, you know, if this could have been found out when I was 17 when I first had that breakdown, my life could have been so different. I wouldn't have had to feel so much shame. You know, I've really felt so stupid, so lonely, so ashamed. Because it's just a shameful problem. Like everybody, I always used to feel jealous of people who could just speak about their mental health problems or just speak about the problems they had. I was like, I've got something that's so embarrassing and sounds so stupid, but it overtakes my life, and I knew it's not normal. Like, you know, it's horrible, really. Like you have very few moments of like living in the moment or just having normal worries and kind of what I would expect normal people are doing in their head. I'm almost like existing as other people, and it's just such a split inside me. So yeah, anyway, that brings me up kind of to today, where I'm seeing the psychiatrist, I'm being treated for OCD. I'm in the best place I've ever been in because I now have an understanding of myself. and I just feel like I don't need to be ashamed, and I really want to get to the place where I can just live more openly and say like this is something I struggle with, but I don't need to be ashamed. You know, OCD, when I've looked it up, it's used to be called, I don't know if it's still called, but it was called the secret illness, and that's really how I feel. I feel like I've been ashamed and like living a secret life for over 25 years, and I just think to myself like, no wonder I've struggled so much, and you know, no wonder I haven't been able to make connections with people. It's, you know, I've felt so guarded and so ashamed, and I felt like I've not been able to explain myself. I've not been able to just talk about like who I am and what our problems are, and this is something, you know, I want to correct. I kind of said by the end of this year I want to just be like so much more open with everyone and with how I feel, and I don't want to have a secret life anymore. So yeah, this, you know, this is difficult to talk about. It's difficult to put yourself out there and tell these kind of stories. I really hope that if you do struggle with this that you'll leave a comment and let me know, and please do like and subscribe to let other people find the video. And I'm going to be making more videos about this topic because, you know, it is something that has been my life really, and I've not been able to talk about it for so long, so I definitely have quite a lot of things to say about it. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!